Hello everyone, welcome to the session Hello World in 3 languages. Before we get started, please take a second to review the code of conduct slide. And without further ado, please let me introduce you to Shanna Matthews, a product manager at Microsoft, who will be your speaker today. Take it away, Shanna.
Hi, everyone. I hope you've all been having a wonderful build. Hello from Seattle. I wanted to take a quick sec to introduce myself with video on before we get into the content. I work a lot with students here at Microsoft, and I'm really frequently asked, what programming language should I learn first? Or what programming language should I learn next? The answer to that is always pretty complicated. It depends on what your goals are, what you're interested in making, what your experience is. Maybe you've already played around with a language or two, and what your other background knowledge is. But to try to help some people get some answers to that question, I put together this talk to kind of go through a bunch of different super popular programming languages. The session assumes that you have maybe started playing around with a few programming languages. You maybe know one, or you've dabbled a little bit. But the idea of it is just to compare and contrast some super awesome languages that are great for beginners to get used to, and to get a little bit of information about why you might choose one versus another. All right, let's get into it. So I bet most of you have heard of the Hello World program. If you have ever done any learning to code, you've maybe seen another talk or something. It's almost always the first program you write when you're trying to learn a new language. The idea of it is just to be one of the simplest things you could possibly do in a programming language. It's just to get your feet under you, to get oriented, and kind of have a little bit of fun. It's like your computer saying hello to you. Right here, you can see an example of the Hello World program in the language C++. All it's doing is displaying to your console, displaying out the string Hello World. So while this might look familiar to you, or you've heard of it, maybe even written it yourself at some point, I bet not a lot of you actually know where this little quirky program comes from. This program is actually widely credited to the guy you're seeing on the slide right here, and his name is Brian Kernighan. He's really famous for writing a book called The C Programming Language. Some of you may have heard of it. C is an old but still super popular programming language that we are actually not going to really talk about today. But the language you saw on the previous slide, C++, and the language we will talk about today, C#, both got their names from the C programming language. So anyway, this guy, Brian, wrote a book before that super famous one about C. And that book was called A Tutorial Introduction to the Programming Language B. Yes, you guessed it. B was the programming language that came before C. And it was in that book that the first ever example of the Hello World program was found. So he put it in the book about B, then he put it in the super famous book about C as well. And ever since then, it's stuck around. People have been using it because it's fun and it's easy. So what we are going to do today is take a little whirlwind tour of 3 super awesome programming languages. The ones we're going to talk about today are Python, C#, and JavaScript. We might do a little bonus and talk about another programming language too, but I'll save that till the end. So the best way to get started with any programming language is to just start playing around with it. Try to write a program, try to tweak it. So that is what we are going to do today. All right. So you should all be able to see my editor right now. I am using VS Code. And before I get too into it, I want to give a quick disclaimer. If any of you listening into this talk have done a lot of programming in any of the languages we're going to talk about, my editor setup might not look like yours. It might look a little different. This is not really an example of what a great Python, C# or JavaScript dev environment looks like, but this is using Visual Studio Code's awesome flexibility in that I'm going to go through each of these languages in just one session here. Okay, so what you're seeing on screen right now is the Hello World program in Python. Python is definitely a favorite language of mine. It's super beginner friendly. It reads really naturally. To any of you who are watching this who have maybe seen a programming language before, played around with one, you can probably actually get a really good feel for what this is doing just by looking at these two super basic lines of code. So what this is doing here is defining a variable called message and assigning this string hello world to it and then printing it out. And that's as easy as it gets. We can run this really quickly. So I'm just going to run this so you can see that it's working. Perfect. So we got our Hello World program working in Python. Python is a really great language to learn if you are interested in data science. It's gotten super popular in that field. If any of you saw the polar bears example that was before this, that touched a little bit on data science. Python is also really great for a lot of other things. It's useful in web development. It's been picked up a lot in the field of DevOps. And it's great because it has a ton of community support. It has a bunch of users and a bunch of people making packages for this language. One quirk I do want to point out about Python is that it cares about white space. That's not very common. It's one of the very few programming languages that do that. So I'll give you a quick example to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to define another variable here, just for the purposes of demonstration. So what I'm doing here is I've just defined another variable for us to play around with, assign the value of it to true, and then I'm checking if that variable is true. I'm going to actually change our message to say hello build. I'll run it really quick. It works. That's great. So Python is funky because of this white space thing. It's very common to indent when you're using any programming language, but it's usually not required. So Python's funky. If I get rid of these, Python is going to actually complain. It's not going to let me do this because this indentation, this really special white space, is the only thing that's telling Python that this belongs to this if statement. Awesome. Okay, another stereotype about Python is that it is a slow language compared to other languages. I have to say that this is generally true. For most purposes, it's not a big deal, but I wanted to briefly touch on one of the reasons why that is true, because it's really interesting when you're comparing programming languages. So one of those reasons is because Python is a dynamically typed programming language. And when I say typed, I don't mean like typing on my keyboard, clickety-clack. I mean the types of variables. So I mentioned that we were giving this variable message, we're assigning it a string. And so I can see that I did that with Visual Studio Code. It's very helpfully telling me that this variable message is a string type. And it will very helpfully tell me that isBuild is a Boolean type. But Python has no issue if we did something like change the type of this variable from a string to, for example, an integer or a number. So I can run this again, and Python says, great, build is true, message is now 3. Python said, no problem. This is really nice for programmers in a lot of circumstances. It makes it easier to write your code, but it's harder on the computer to have to do this, to have to be constantly figuring out, wait, what type is this variable again? So the fact that Python is dynamically typed is one contributing factor that makes it slower. Okay, let's move on to C#. I'm just going to clear my terminal here. C# is another favorite programming language of mine. I've used it quite a bit for a few things. But as you can see here right away, it looks quite different than Python. While Python, we just had 2 super short lines of code, we actually have 13 lines of code here just to do the same thing. I'll run this too, just so you can see that it's working for us. But C# is known as being a much more verbose kind of language, and that just means we have to write a lot more things on the screen to get the same results. In a lot of cases, that's okay. It's worth it to have that extra structure, but can be annoying if as a programmer, you're just trying to get going as quickly as possible. So I mentioned that Python is a dynamically typed programming language, and that can be a little slower. C# is a statically typed programming language, and that's one of the things that makes C# able to be faster than Python. So we can see that here by the fact that we are defining what kind of variable. So we have our message variable again, and we're telling the computer what kind of variable we're going to put there. And if we tried to do something like say message equals 3 here, Visual Studio Code, being very helpful, is going to tell us, hey, wait a sec, that doesn't work. You can't do that. And that's because of that static typing thing I mentioned. So what are some of the things you would do with C#? C#, as I said, is another awesome programming language. It's really mature and stable, powerful debugging. It's useful in a lot of different ways. It's useful for its like stereotypical use, which is app development, particularly on Windows. You can use it in tons of different development environments. It's quite popular in IoT. It's very popular for use in the cloud, especially on Azure. And you can use it to make tons of stuff like games, using Unity, and even phone apps as well on your mobile phone. A stereotype about C# that is actually not true is that it is a Windows-only language. That's absolutely not true. You can both run things made in C# on tons of devices, like I just mentioned, but you can also develop C# and other .NET family languages on any platform you want. So while I am running a Windows computer, I'm actually doing this development, all of it, in Linux. This is actually Ubuntu right here. Let me just show you. Well, I just asked my terminal here, hey, what are you? So you can see I'm actually running Ubuntu here. So we're doing all of this C# development on Linux. You can do it on Mac and obviously PC as well. Cool. All right. Let's move on to JavaScript. Clear my terminal one more time for you guys. All right, so here is the Hello World program in JavaScript. Run it too. On first glance, it looks a little bit more similar to Python in that it's pretty short. We only have 2 lines of code again. That's pretty nice. But JavaScript is quite different from Python in a lot of ways. One of the ways is that it is not white space dependent. It doesn't care. We can do the same kind of thing. True is build. And you can see here, again, I have to use these braces. Hello, build. Hi, everyone. And I can do anything I want with this. Doesn't matter how much white space I put, JavaScript doesn't mind it. But I have to say JavaScript is not my favorite language, even though it is very popular. JavaScript, you would probably, for the most part, use it in web development. It's very common in the front end and in the back end. It is really the language of the web. But as I kind of said, JavaScript isn't my favorite because of a stereotype it has. So JavaScript definitely has the stereotype of being quirky. I'll show you just one super simple example of that. But there's a lot of funny things where JavaScript doesn't work in a way that's necessarily very intuitive. Okay, so I'll just show you one example. I'm gonna, for speed. So I'm just gonna define another variable here that is also a string. And I'll kind of get rid of some of this stuff because we're not going to use it for this particular part. And I'm going to check too if these two strings are equal. I'm just going to have the computer print out that they're the same, if they're the same, and if they're not, I'm going to have it tell me that they're not the same. Perfect. Not the same. Awesome. Okay, let's try running that. So I ran that trying to check these two strings. And so JavaScript told me that these are the same. Okay, that's cool. I can get it. We have message that says it's a string, message2 that says it's a string. They definitely are the exact same characters there. I copy pasted it exactly. So JavaScript's telling me they're the same. Okay, that's great. But if I add a third equal sign, and then I ask JavaScript again if they're the same, we get a completely different answer. I won't go too deep into why that is true, but it is a quirk around type coercion, and it's really annoying. And there's, at least to me personally, I'm not a JavaScript developer. It's just one of the many quirks of JavaScript that JavaScript developers have to get used to. Okay, awesome. That has been a super quick hello world and 3 fantastic, super useful, super popular programming languages that professionals use all the time. Now, I want to very quickly show you a less popular, less useful programming language that programmers don't use all the time. That's super fun. So when I was growing up, lolcats were like the best meme. It was like the original meme. And developers, of course, loved lolcats as well. So some super creative developer out there actually created a programming language called LOLCode. And the syntax of that programming language is based on how lolcats speak. So here's an example of the Hello World program in LOLCode. I'll run it very quickly so you guys can see the output. But yes, we are in fact doing the Hello World program in LOLCode. We're saying, hi world. Here's another program just to show you some of the really super silly syntax. It's a very fun programming language. I cannot say I'm an expert in it, but there's a lot of fun programming languages out there like this one to explore and just dive deep into. All right. I am going to just show a couple more slides, and then I will take some of your guys' questions. Here is one resource. If you found this fun, I highly recommend you guys check out a website called Rosetta Code. It's based on Rosetta Stone, if you've ever heard of that. It's around learning languages, like spoken languages, but Rosetta Code helps people learn different programming languages. So it has all kinds of examples of like typical programs like the Hello World program in tons of different languages. So it's really great for learners. I will also leave up this slide just quickly doing a compare and contrast over some of the languages we talked about today. But I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have now.
Thank you very much, Shannon, for this amazing talk and these demos. There has been a couple questions from the audience, and I just want to read them out to you. The first question is, how much white space are you giving in Python, and does it need to be the same everywhere in the program?
Great question. Yeah. So what I am doing in Python, I don't want to start the tabs versus spaces wars. If any of you new programmers have heard of that, there's people with very, very strong opinions about whether we should use tabs or spaces in our code. I'm not going to get too into that, but whichever one you pick, Python is fine with that. I personally use spaces. Python's cool with whatever you want to do, but you have to be consistent. So I, for example, am using 4 spaces here. Let's see, how can I show you? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 spaces, and I always have to use 4 spaces there. Let's just put another line here, message equals 4. So if I used 5 spaces, for example, we're running. Let me go back to the Python. Hello, Python. Here we go. Perfect. So Python is going to complain about this. It's like, no, heck no, not cool. But if I consistently use 5 spaces instead of 4 spaces, Python says, cool, no big deal, I'm good with it. And that would be true if I used tabs as well. So whatever you choose, whatever you prefer, Python's okay with it as long as you are consistent within your own code.
Awesome. And another question coming your way, Shadow. There's a person on the line that already knows basic Python and is wondering if there's any suggestions on how they can make themselves better. at Python?
Oh, what an awesome question. So if you've already started learning some Python, there is a super great learning path about Python on Learn. I'll go there really quickly just to show you. And I'll put this in the chat too. So there's a fantastic learning path around Python that will teach you not only the language, but how to really use it. So how to set up your own developer environment properly on your computer, and how to build real projects with it. So I totally recommend that. I also recommend once you get kind of through that kind of a beginner stage in a learning path like that, the best way to keep learning is just keep playing around. So find something that you're passionate about. If you want to learn data science and you want to build a web app, find examples of web apps on GitHub that were built in Python. There's a few different frameworks that are really popular for that. Django and Flask are a couple. Find examples, see what they did, maybe clone their repo and tweak it, play around with it. That's the great next step. And then once you're comfortable doing something like that, it's time to kind of strike out on your own and build your own thing from scratch. Whatever you're passionate about, really the best way to learn any new technology, especially programming languages, is to just try building it yourself.
Awesome. And also another follow-up question on that is, which programming languages do you need to use to develop for Android apps?
Ooh, I'm not an Android developer. The last time I touched Android development, I was in college, and Java was like the language to use for developing Android apps. So Java is definitely still an option, and Java is quite similar to C# in terms of syntax, in terms of how it works. So that would be a good option. You can also create cross-platform apps with C# and the .NET framework, and you can use Xamarin for that. And if you build an app with Xamarin, it will actually run not only on Android, but also iPhone and PC as well. And you can use C# and a few other .NET languages for that. So all those are great options.
Awesome. And there was one question about actually the author and the book that you mentioned at the very beginning. I was wondering if you could just tell us what who the author is and what the title is again.
Yeah, here, I can actually paste that into the chat if folks are interested. But the person I was talking about there is a guy named Brian Kernighan. Let me paste the name of the book in there. The book is called The C Programming Language, Brian Kernighan. It was him and another guy. His name was Dennis Ritchie. This is a super old book. Brian Kernighan and Dennis Ritchie are like kind of famous old guys by this point. Definitely knew what they were talking about with these programming languages. I don't necessarily recommend C and C++ as great beginner-friendly languages, but if you have already dabbled or are super interested in doing programming in those languages, this book is actually still relevant. These guys defined the standard for this book, and they've come up with many new revisions of it. So if you're quite interested, do go ahead and check it out. It's still good despite being pretty old at this point. I'll just also quickly say the reason why I don't recommend C and C++ necessarily as super beginner-friendly languages are not only the syntax, but some other quirks about the languages. Here's C++ again. Some quirks about the languages that are just, they make it a little bit more challenging. So all the languages that I talked about, Python, C#, JavaScript, are managed languages. No, I don't want to switch to the insider version right now. They're managed languages. And so that means the memory that your programming language is using when you're writing code, the memory. So everything you make takes up memory on your computer. Everything you define takes up memory. And when you're writing in C and C++, you have to manage that memory yourself. So that means you have to kind of know how many objects you've created and you have to get rid of them as well. And that's a little bit tedious. And the concepts are just a little bit more to keep track of, which is hard when you're a beginner.
Awesome. There's been a couple questions on game development. What languages would you suggest learning for making your own game?
Ooh, I'm not a game developer. The game development I have done was working on a game in Unity for the HoloLens, actually, and we used C# for that. I really like C#. It's just such a widespread language. You can use it for just about anything. So if you're interested in doing kind of that mixed reality programming, C# is awesome for that. JavaScript is also widely used for that. If you're thinking about other kinds of games, those languages like C and C++ are actually still quite common in lots of game development.
Awesome. There was a question about what kind of apps they can build using Python and how they can integrate with Visual Studios.
Oh, yeah. So Python, just like C#, is super flexible. You can create all kinds of stuff with Python. One of the easiest ways to get started with Python is creating just desktop apps. And there are nice libraries in Python for creating desktop apps. They'll help you make your user interface and make it all pretty, and you don't have to write that much code to do it. So that's one type of app. Another type of app that's really common would be a web app, and you can totally make web apps with Python. You do usually have to use some JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, those web languages too. But you can write a ton of your code just in Python and like HTML only, which is super nice. Flask is one of my favorite frameworks for doing that because it's super simple. If you search for Flask on Learn, that I linked to the Python learning path on Learn earlier. So check that out and then search for Flask, and you'll find some modules about using Flask to make web apps too.
Awesome. And just to wrap it up, there have been a lot of questions actually on developing Office add-ons. Would you have any suggestions on if they should be using JavaScript or TypeScript, or even just explaining the difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of different languages you can make to make Office add-ons. I love that question. I'm actually working on a Learn module about how to use Python to make some Office add-ins. But so all of the above, really, for the most part. JavaScript and TypeScript are both two great languages. TypeScript is made by Microsoft, and it's similar to JavaScript. You can basically do everything you want to do with JavaScript. You can do it with Python too, TypeScript too. But TypeScript have gotten rid of a lot of the weird JavaScript quirks that I was mentioning earlier. It makes it feel a lot more like a C# kind of structured language to write with. A lot of the strange variable type quirks that come up, you don't have to deal with TypeScript. If you are a beginner and you're like, you really want to make Office compatible stuff, or you like the Windows development ecosystem, I 100% recommend TypeScript. I think it's a great alternative to JavaScript.
Cool. It looks like we have 2 minutes left, so let's squeeze in one last question. There's a question about Visual Studio, if they can be used on Macs.
Visual Studio on a Mac. Gosh. Visual Studio there used to be a version for Macs, but what I would 100% recommend is Visual Studio Code. So let me take a quick second to explain the difference. Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code are actually two different products, even though they're named quite similarly. Visual Studio is primarily a Windows development environment. So you run it on a PC, and you use it to build, for the most part, things that will run on PCs, also in the cloud and some other examples too. But a lot of developers pay to use Visual Studio as well. But Visual Studio Code is a super lightweight, totally free editor that runs on any platform. So Windows, Mac, and Linux. I don't use Visual Studio anymore at all, even though I used to 100% use it. I use Visual Studio Code all the time. It's very flexible, great for beginners. And it, yeah, definitely runs very well on your Mac.
Thank you very much for your talk, Shanna. I think we've come to the end of our session.
Awesome. Okay, I will just show one more thing before I go. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for the awesome questions. I loved getting them. I love talking to you guys. If you guys liked this session, I would love it if you went to this link at the top and filled out an anonymous survey to let us know what you thought. So the URL for that is aka.ms/studentzone2020 survey. And the session code you'll use is COM219. If you're interested in learning more, getting code for any of the sessions that you have seen in the Student Zone, you can go to aka.ms/students@build to get all of that. There's a lot of other great resources here, like Learn, which I talked about and linked to, Azure for Students if you want to learn the cloud and get some free credits, as well as the Imagine Cup and the Microsoft Student Learn Ambassador Program. Awesome. Thanks again so much, guys. Happy build.